We'll go ahead and put the sign-up sheets. If you did not get on the sign-up sheet, we'll go ahead and put those back out after the lecture is over. So if you will come in and take a seat. And there we are. It is 5:15. So in the interest of being prompt, we will start. So my name's Jack Estel. You are attending, as you probably well know, the last of our David S. Saurman Provocative lectures for the spring of 2014. I'm a lecturer with the Economics Department. I know many of you. Before I go any further, I'll do the same thing. Let's maybe take out our infernal devices and figure out how to turn them down so they won't interfere with us. Ah, beautiful. Haha. And I'd like to announce that we will have a meeting of the Barstool Economists at Flames Eatery on the corner of 4th and San Fernando after this lecture is over. It probably takes about 15 minutes to get over there, so I'm thinking it'll be about 7 o'clock. And I understand there may be some beer and pizza available over there for folks. So if you are a member, feel free to come over. If you're not a member, feel free to come over, okay? You could be a potential member. Maybe as a potential member, that will incentivize us to encourage you with some sort of benefits, okay, to make it worth your time, possibly. This lecture series began in fall of 2001, and it was developed to foster our vision of higher education, the challenge of ideas, and the development of critical thinking in an environment of respect for intellectual discourse. We can differ about things. We can have different opinions. It's how we express those opinions that allow us to understand other people's positions. You, as our guests tonight, are invited to relax, hopefully not too much on this warm evening, and to ponder and enjoy our guest speakers as they develop their positions on controversial subjects or unusual subjects, I think as this one may be. We provide a question and answer period at the end of the presentation to allow the audience to engage in a respectful dialogue with our speaker. And it is our hope that these lectures will allow everyone here to have a more thorough understanding of the topics presented and a greater appreciation for the diversity of opinions. I know some of you may have to leave at some point during this. If you can be as quiet as possible, we would appreciate that. And we are fortunate today to have Tom Means as our guest speaker. Professor Means is from our own Department of Economics. He's been here since 1981, a long time, he says. He teaches graduate courses in microeconomics and econometrics. He's also the director of the Council for Economic Education, which works with local high school teachers to increase their effectiveness on teaching economic topics. He graduated with a BA in economics from UC Davis and also with a PhD, a master's and a PhD from UCLA. His research interests include economic modeling, measuring the publicness of public goods, tax share elasticity, land use, and more broadly, public choice in local government. He has numerous publications and has provided presentations in many economic and social science conferences, including the Southerns, the Westerns, ASA, Public Choice, and APPE. And I hear that there is a good chance that he might actually be presenting at a soon-to-come Mount Pelerin Society meeting. Ah, he laughs. I have to say Tom has provided invaluable support for many of the graduates here, particularly people in the graduate programs, and that includes me, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank him publicly for all that he's done, not just for me, but for everyone here, and I'd like to give him a hand for that. Thank you. Tom has served in local government from 2001 through 2012. No, I think I have the first date wrong. And it was 2004 through 2012, and in 2008 you were the mayor of Mountain View, right? And so his topic for tonight is, do I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then, or do economists make good politicians? I look forward to hearing what economists think, what an economist thinks about local political process after viewing it from the inside. Please give a warm welcome to Tom.
All right, so I guess I may move this and walk at some point. We'll see. So, in 1998, I got involved in city politics. I sat on the Parks and Rec Commission, and I'll explain how I got that job later. And then 4 years later, I ran for council, or 6 years later, I ran for council. And so we have a 2-term limit, and I sat on council, and we rotated through as mayors. And, I did it partly because my interests, my research and stuff was public choice, public finance, and just kind of wanted to get a look at, well, what is it that local politicians do and so forth. So it was an interesting experience, but it made me think about the lack of economic literacy among politicians, and it all starts at the local level, and then it feeds up to higher levels, as I'm going to argue. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically, if you're an econ major, and I know most of you are econ majors, you should be very proud of being an econ major, because my experience has been, even if you're an average economist, and I know some of you are average because you're in my classes, even if you're an average economist and understand basically the average, average skill level, you're still going to be a better thinker and better decision maker than a non-econ major. And that's because economics is a very powerful social science in terms of trying to model and analyze human behavior. And it has important precepts about prices and market structures that no other field really covers. And so you're going to see this when I do I'm going to tell a lot of stories about politics and stuff, but I'm going to basically go through what you get in a principles book and show you that most of the politicians I met were clueless about basic economic thoughts and concepts and so forth. So when I say that, I'm talking as a generalization to all politicians and local politicians. But there's a few that I met that kind of broke the mold and were good thinking and thought like economists. So, for example, on the current Mountain View Council, we have John Inks, who is he's come to Appy's conference. He's come to some of these events. He's read and been presented with a lot of economic thought, and he's understood it. And he's not here today. My other colleague who's on council, Matt Pear, he actually went and got an MBA at Berkeley, but that's okay. But he actually understands economics and has been presented. He's a business person. He's probably Mountain View's most eligible bachelor ladies in Mountain View. And so maybe he'll hang around for the bar stool later and so forth. And also, Greg Coladonato here is on the Human Resource Commission in Mountain View, and he's got an MBA. And I'm going to talk about what is it about economics that makes it important. So I guess I got to flip my chart here. Okay, so some of my thoughts here in terms of this is, looking at what is the role of local government, what type of institution, and what qualifications should we look for in local politicians. And okay, so that's not. Is it going? Oh, you know what? I'm doing this backwards, so let me go back here. Okay, well, let's just go with this, okay? So we'll just keep this open for discussion. If you're going to hire someone to run a $200 million company, what do you think should be their basic qualifications? Just curious. Just shout out something. What? Worked in finance? Okay. Okay, but experience doing what? A previous experience running a company? Okay. Basic economic skills? Okay, understanding what? Understanding their customers, okay. Okay, vision. Okay, that's kind of in with leadership and stuff, okay. Well, okay, his employees, let's say. Okay, what are we going to say, Fred? Understand the industry he's in. Okay, great. We'll come back to that. So basically my outline for the talk here today is, I flipped it here, so this is not going to, I'm going to get confused. I'm still looking. I wrote my notes on here, but I don't have the... what do I wish politicians knew about economics, or what do I know most politicians don't know about economics? And again, there are exceptions, but I would say the majority of politicians fit into this category. Now, I'll admit, when I ran for office, I had some shortcomings. I didn't realize that most of what local politicians do is make land decision uses. Almost 80 to 90% of the work that came to me involved land decisions, what to build, what to, commercial, retail, housing, and things like that. I never took a course in urban economics. Didn't study urban economics. So I was at a big disadvantage in the beginning, not as bad as my colleagues who didn't know any economics, but, I have to admit, I bought a house. I understood housing markets a little because I bought a house and could follow that. Commercial markets were very confusing because I'd look around my city and, when prices go up, people build and expand and do things. Commercial property owners would let their properties sit there underutilized. And I would sit there and say, boy, what are they doing? Why aren't they building? Why aren't they doing this? Or how can they afford to let, a property sit empty for 10 or 15 years? There's properties in my town that have been undeveloped since I've lived there, 30 years. And I'd sit there and say, why aren't they developing it? The value of land is expensive. It's worth more. They could make more money. And so I admit, I would ask people, I said, why don't you develop your land? I would try to figure out what's going on. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, but that. So the first thing, let's see if this works here. So I kind of want to go on a sidetrack just to show you the thinking of politicians. And okay, I got it. Okay, so this is kind of it's a non-economics issue, but it's an issue of values. So we're a company. I think of us as a company. We have a mission statement like any company, right? And, it's a pretty simple company. It does have a couple good things, which is we provide goods and services in a financially responsible manner, which means what? We've got to pay for stuff, okay? We've got to cover the cost of providing these services. Whether it's caring and diverse, that's kind of fluffy stuff. But let me give you an example of an issue of where we violated our mission statement, and people got really upset. Most of you remember Hurricane Katrina, okay? And I actually, as part of the National League of Cities, did a tour from New Orleans to Biloxi. Saw devastated cities. I mean, they weren't even cities. All I saw was parking lots and driveways as we took this bus tour. It was horrible. We went to Waveland, which was the ground zero for the destruction. The whole city was destroyed. We met the city staff and stuff, and they were in these little trailer courts and just saying how, it was disaster. They lost all their records. They lost all their files and stuff, and they were talking about, basically starting from scratch. And, a lot of people in this country volunteered to help people in Katrina. So someone on our council thought that it would be a good idea for us to help. Except what they wanted to do was to take general fund money that we have collected from our taxpayers of our town, and give them to Katrina victims, or actually groups that were going to help Katrina victims. And, here's a distinction. Well, what do we collect money from for our residents? We collect it to provide public services for the city of Mountain View. We don't collect it to provide for cities in Louisiana or Mississippi. So I raised an objection. I said, this violates our mission statement. Where does it say that we should be giving money to another city? And, again, this gets into people thought, well, it doesn't matter, it's our money. In other words, council members say, it's my money, I've collected it or something, even though it was paid for by taxpayers or collected from taxpayers. And I said, well, look, if we want to help, we should volunteer like everyone else. In other words, let's put out a couple buckets in different departments, and if employees want to donate money, they can donate money, and we can give that money to the cities that need help. But I'm not sure we should be spending our taxpayer money on someone else. And I caught a lot of flack from that, but actually I won the vote on that. We decided not to send money to Mississippi. Some people thought, well, this is embarrassing. Other cities are doing stuff. And I say, well, other cities can do what they want. But if we have a mission statement, and this is our mission statement, I think it's pretty clear we can't take money we've collected to provide public services and then decide, well, we'll spend it any way we want. Okay? So I've got a whole bunch of topics I'm going to talk about and so forth. So I'm going to skip to this. And so this is going to be the general outline of my topics. And so the first one is what politicians don't know. Okay? And what politicians don't know is the difference between private firms and ownership of firms and government ownership of firms. Excuse me. And this is, I'll have some examples of this. So what do we learn in economics? Well, we have a whole section in a textbook, in your micro textbooks, on the difference between public firms and private firms. And what are some of the big differences? Well, private owners reap the benefits and costs of their decisions to produce goods and services. Private owners can engage in reputation building. Private owners can respond quickly to changes in demand. Whereas public institutions are not run by the owners. They're kind of run as a trustee type thing. They have difficulty responding to changing conditions and so forth. So I've got like 4 examples of how we mess this up and so to speak. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to do a couple of them and see how time goes. So daycare center. Okay? So when I got to Mountain View, people told me that Mountain View does not have a daycare center. And I said, what do you mean? We've got all kinds of daycare centers. I see them every day. I go to work. I drive by them. There's all kinds of daycare centers in Mountain View. And then it would say, well, okay, there's none that are run by the city. I said, well, okay, so is that something the city should engage in? Or should we just let the private market handle this issue? And so then it was like, well, and again, these are people that maybe know a little economics, but not. Well, there's a market failure. I said, really, what's a market failure here? People pay and contract. There are various types of services. There are small homes where people take 3 to 6 daycare customers versus middle-sized versus private companies that provide daycare. Where's the market failure? Well, it's too expensive for some people. Okay, so what do you want to do? Well, we want to build our own daycare center, and we built it on public land, and we're going to help poor people. I said, okay, how are we going to do that? Who's going to pay for that? Well, we haven't got that quite figured out yet. But, we're going to have a daycare center. So I'll give you the bottom line of what we ended up with. We ended up with a nice daycare center in a not-so-good neighborhood that's high-priced. It costs $1,000 a month for this. Back then, that was 7-8 years ago. And it subsidizes. We have like 100 clients that make it full, and we subsidize 5 rates. 5 people get subsidies. Okay? So they could either get full subsidies or partial subsidies. Okay? And we hired an outside firm to run the daycare center, and they bid on it, and they pay rent. We took out a loan. The Packard Foundation, one of these groups, they loaned us money. And here we are competing in the daycare market now. Okay? Now, it didn't go that well. One is we were very high priced, and that's because our council member says, well, we have to offer the best. Well, that's nice, but there's a lot of different competition out there, and what if our best, there's not enough people to fill up the spots? So, one, they never filled up the spots. 2, they never were able then to offer enough subsidies. to cover their costs. And, I pointed this out, and, we would have people representing poor interest groups, low-income groups come in and say, we want daycare, and we'd say, this isn't your daycare, unless you're one of the lucky ones to get a subsidy. This is going to be way too expensive, and it didn't matter. We had to have a government-produced daycare center. So I think a year or two ago, so they've been running this 6 or 7 years, the company came and basically said, we can't do this anymore. We're not making enough money. You want these loan payments. You want all this stuff to pay for it. We can't do it. So they've now put requests out for proposals for another company, and I don't know where the process is right now, but it was a complete failure. Now, again, it helped those people that are willing to pay a lot of money, and it's a nice daycare center, but it totally missed its goal in terms of helping the people that supposedly weren't able to get daycare because of this market failure. And again, I think when I pointed out there's a lot of competition out there, some council members just seemed totally unaware of what the market forces were and whether or not they were going to beat them or not. We had the same thing with golf course and tennis courts management. We have private groups or private firms that manage, but they have no incentive to manage efficiently. So we pay them a fee to manage, but then the question is who maintains the courts, who maintains the golf course, and things like that. I tried to get better contracts, but again, most of the council members seem unaware of how a business is run and whether or not something is sustainable or not. So let me give you an example of a golf course that's run well would be Santa Teresa Golf Course, because the firm that owns that, the county still owns the golf course, but they let the firm take all the revenue and then they take 8%. Okay? So in other words, every dollar that's spent, the private firm gets 92 cents. Well, guess what? They have an incentive to invest and make it into a great golf course. The other courses have a fixed fee where they say, we're only going to pay you a fixed fee, and then you have to cover all these other costs. And again, you don't see as much investment in the course and so forth, or you see kind of political haggling. The other thing is you can adjust prices quicker. Again, golf is very competitive. There are a lot of golf courses around here, and if we in our public, when we had the public run it, we couldn't adjust prices quick enough. So if we set prices too high, we'd lose money, and then if we set prices too low, we'd get long queues. And so privately run golf courses are very efficient. They advertise, they know what the market is, and they're very quick at responding to changes in demand. So the taxi story was somewhat of a success. We deregulated taxis. And we had a rule in Mountain View where you can drop someone off, but you couldn't pick them up. So we had a cartel of 2 taxi organizations saying, hey, we're the ones that can pick up and no one else can. And so we had other people apply for the right to pick up customers, but the kind of our taxi czar, who was a police officer, would say, no, we already have enough competition. And again, you can tell people that don't understand markets when they say, well, if we open up the marketplace, we'll have 10,000 taxis in Mountain View. Really? You think they're all going to make money? You think there's that many customers that we're going to get flooded with taxis? And again, it's markets are constrained by the number of buyers you have. So why would you expect an infinite supply of flooding of taxis? But that's how some people think. We had one good discussion, and this was kind of the humorous part. So the taxi cartel, they hire a PR person who's a former council person. They come to council, and they're against all this because they have a cartel. They get to control how many they supply and pick up and stuff. So he stands up and says, if you guys deregulate this and open up the market, it could be dangerous for the residents of Mountain View. And so then I'm like, okay. So I go, how dangerous? And he says, well, imagine you take a train, the Caltrain stops in Mountain View, and you get off the Caltrain, and all of a sudden, 5 or 6 taxi drivers come up and start, and then he stopped. So I finished the sentence, and start competing for your service, right? And geez, that would be horrible if one of them offered a lower price than the others, And, that's it. So we deregulated taxis, not completely on prices, but we got the output so that anyone can supply and stuff. I'm getting a pairing thing on here. Okay. Okay. I didn't flip this one. Okay. Okay. I'm watching this is probably not working too. I'm going to have to stick with this slide and not worry about my notes. Okay. Okay. So here's another thing that I found that politicians don't know. They don't know the difference between a public good and a collective, or what we call a community good. And this, I'll show you examples of where they made serious mistakes on this. And what do politicians, economists know? Well, we study this, okay? And so this is in any basic micro book. Goods have different characteristics, and two of the ones that determine the type of good are rivalry and consumption, right? So rivalry and consumption means if I consume something, there's less of everyone else to consume, okay? So if we have a piece of pie and I take a slice, there's less for everyone else, okay? So my consumption is rivaled with the other people. Non-rival means I could consume something and you could consume the same thing and there would be still the same amount of output. So an example of a non-rival consumption would be this lecture. Everyone gets to hear the same lecture, right? Your consumption doesn't change someone else's consumption unless you're obnoxious and stand up in front of them or whatever. But the point is, everyone consumes the same lecture, okay? So the cost of adding more people into this room is essentially zero. There's a limit to how much you can produce, but basically it costs zero. Once we supply this lecture to one person, the cost to a second, third, and fourth person is about the same, okay? The other thing is excludability. There are some types of goods that are difficult to exclude and those that are not, okay? So what do we do in economics? We have this little chart here. And let me do it this way. So on the bottom right corner, we have what we call the community good, which is like national defense, okay? And then we have the private good like wheat, and then we have a commons good like fish. So fish are like a commons good problem or free pasture because why? They're private goods, they're rival consumption, but not excludable, okay? So I'll talk about community goods and commons goods and so forth. Okay, I'm going to skip through as to the arguments on why the government might produce public goods and tax people, and I'm going to get to the examples here, okay? So here's an example of where a lot of planners and urban planning people totally screw up on assigning costs. And these are what are called cost of community study surveys. And these are done, there's millions of these done. When I first got on council, they said, Tom, you know, you have to realize land development is the following truism. The best use of land is retail. The next best that breaks even is maybe housing and commercial. And then the worst type of land use is multifamily housing. Okay? So that was what I was told. And this is actually, Scott Hareholder writes for the Mercury, actually had this quote, and I used it because I think it pretty much exemplifies that argument. And the argument goes that, you know, retail doesn't need city services, but homeowners do, or renters do. And so if you have more of them, it increases the demand for services. And then he said, every study shows this. So I asked him, I said, Scott, what are the studies? And give me an example. Well, you know, like it was an ed op piece, so of course he said, well, I just said that. I didn't really mean it. I don't know if there's any studies, you know, or he didn't provide me with any. But he did provide me with a comment from the San Jose council member, I think it was Pierre Luigi or something like that. And he said he figured out that if you want to run a fire department 24/7, it will cost the city $640,000 a year to run a station. Okay? No, with just the fire station itself. It'll cost $640,000 to run a full-time and again, that's an expensive one because you remember, you know, fire people get paid a lot and they get a lot of benefits and stuff like that. So I said, okay, so that's true, Scott. What's missing from that analysis? No? Well, how many people benefit from that? How many people are protected? If it's one household, Scott, I'll agree with you. It's not worth it. It's too expensive. But if it's 1 million households, maybe it's worth it. So again, failure to connect the benefits and the costs there. You say, well, here's what it costs. Okay, but to make a good decision, I need to know the benefits. So this is kind of the thinking that takes place with this. And let's just think about this as economists for a second. Let's suppose you're told that retail has the best return. And what they mean by that is the amount of government revenue that comes in and then the cost of providing the public services. So it's only from the government's perspective of how much revenue am I going to get with this land use and then what's it going to cost me to provide the public services. Okay? So let's think for a sec. If that's the margin, how many towns do you know are completely retail? Okay, now, I've heard of the city of industry, but it's surrounded by people, right? So what's the problem? One of the problems with that is it's not applied empirically, so something's wrong. 2, retail can't exist unless they have what? Customers, and customers should live what? Far away as possible? No, they've got to live close by. So obviously there's something wrong with the analysis. And in terms of finance, it's because when you look at a benefit cost, you have to have separate uses have to be independent. They can't be intercorrelated. So obviously you can't look at housing without looking at retail, and so you can't do them separate like that. But the more serious violation here, which was the cost allocation, okay? So let's think of this. Suppose this was an unruly crowd and I felt I needed police protection. So let's suppose we hire one policeman to work here, okay? And let's suppose the crowd is half the size as it is, okay? So then all of a sudden the crowd doubles, okay? Do I need a second policeman? Possibly, maybe, maybe not, okay? So, but did the cost of this policeman monitoring this crowd change? No. Let's suppose you have a public park. Public park. I can use it, you can use it, everyone can use it, it can get congested maybe. Let's suppose we put 10 people in the park. Now let's suppose we put 20 people in the park. Does it cost twice as much now to provide that park? No. There may be a slight increase, but it's clearly not based on proportionality to the number of people. So what happens here is when they allocate the cost, because multifamily has more people per unit, per acre, they allocate a higher cost. And I actually brought this up to one of our original city managers who was before the current one we had, and I said, Bruce Leedstrom, I said, what did you do when all these people told you that you were going to build high-density housing and develop property and not do retail but do housing and commercial and stuff? And I said, what did you do when these people came to you and said, all these studies show that it won't pay for itself? He goes, I ignored them. I said, but why? He goes, because I knew what my police and fire responses could do and whether or not we could cover the increase in population. So without being an economist and understanding public goods, he knew it was the marginal cost of the extra coverage of police and fire. And he knew that, hey, it's not that much. I've got a block, an acre with 20 people on it or 30 people in it. I still have to provide the same police service to that, and it's not going to be much difference in cost. Now, again, not every service the city provides is public. They provide art classes and things like that are private goods and stuff. But a lot of what the police services and fire services, it's the protection that you're paying for, not the individual service. And so again, these studies totally misallocate. And again, when I asked city planners, I said, well, how is the cost going to change when you add 30 more people to the town? Is it going to go up 30 times? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm just saying, adding more people in this room doesn't change the cost of this room. It's fixed. Everyone gets to listen to the same lecture. Okay, so those studies, again, and they're done by all these urban planning people. They're very proud of what they do. they're totally flawed. And in fact, multifamily housing tends to bring in the most revenue. And I don't know what the exact assignment of cost should be, but any reasonable assignment of cost, they would come out with the most revenue, and so forth. So what about commons provisions? Well, let me show you the examples. Okay, so we know the commons problem, which is what? If you let the cows graze on the land, we overgraze the land because no one owns the land, all this kind of stuff. All that stuff's in an economics book, right? The tragedy of the commons, right? So how did we do that in Mountain View? Well, we had a potential park, and we had a developer that was going to build some housing, and the residents were demanding, hey, we want a community orchard on that property. We want it on the parkland. We want it on private land. We want a community orchard to represent our heritage. Okay? Well, who owns the trees now? No one, right? The city. Everyone owns them, right? So what happens when there's fruit on that tree? People are going to just let it drop and rot and all that kind of stuff, right? No, I mean, people are going to pick it. And then, well, what's to stop someone from picking it? I guess they could be monitored and told they'll get in trouble and stuff. But the point is, there's an incentive to pick the fruit early and overpick it, because if I don't pick it today, Dick Pfaff may pick it tomorrow, right? And I've got to watch out for that. So, I pointed out, I said, these are horrible ideas. Having a community garden with fruit and stuff like that. Have something non-bearing fruit, something that people can look at, and that's it, not that they will harvest. Community gardens, the same thing. Distinction of a private good versus a public good. So I'm a gardener. My dad was a farmer from Nebraska. I have gardens in my house. I have a garden plot on my private land. I love gardening. But we have community gardens. And they're treated like they're public goods. And I pointed out, I said, well, first of all, name a public service that we provide where we let people rent in perpetuity public land. Because people get these plots and they keep them forever. And no one could. Someone said golf, and I said, no one owns golf. And besides, I only rent the hole, right? I use the hole and then I move on, right? But here's the thing. We don't charge for the use of the land appropriately because they're using public land, which is expensive. But also, they treat it like it's a private good. So people would come and say, Tom, the garden, it's a community good. I said, really? When I go to my neighborhood park, I can walk onto it anywhere I want. When I go to the community garden, you know what's there? It's a fence with a gate that's locked and says, don't come in here unless you have a plot. That's not very friendly park. It's not very open. And if it's public, why can't I pick their fruit and vegetables? I'm sure they'd get upset. So I'm not totally against. And then I get this, well, there's some people that don't have land, Tom, to grow fruit and vegetables. I said, fine, let's restrict it to apartment owners. Well, the homeowners that have land, that have plots, they object to that. I said, well, there's a big waiting list. Well, tell you what, if we're not going to price the waiting list, let's have a random draw each year, and so anyone can get a shot at getting a plot. Well, I don't want to give that. People that have these vested rights don't want to give them up very easily. And so now we have this huge shortage, or the alleged shortage of community garden plots that people can't resolve other than saying, well, the city needs to provide more gardening plots. And I'm like saying, no, we don't. But I'm not on office anymore, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. So what politicians don't know? They don't know the different types of market structure. Okay, and what do we learn in economics? We spend a good third of the course on market structure, whether it's pure competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Okay, so I've kind of talked about mistakes. So like, child care services, very competitive in our town. And we misgauge the quality and demand and so forth. Taxi services, we deregulated, okay? Not completely, but partially, and then the golf course. And again, it's, okay, I'm grew up as a jock. I played sports, so I played golf and played sports, so I kind of know something about sports. But it's amazing talking to some of the council members that are totally non-athletic, and I'll show you in a couple of minutes why, some more stuff they said. But, you know, it's a lot of them just hate sports, so they hate golf. You know, so golf was like our biggest moneymaker. You know, and again, for some of you that have been around, in 1980, golf was at a huge demand, and the public courses like Palo Alto, San Jose, Santa Teresa, and Sunnyvale were just overwhelmed. You know, you couldn't get on there unless you had reservations 2 weeks in advance and that minute and stuff. It was very tough. But what happened? The increase in demand for golf encouraged private developers and other cities to build more courses. Mountain View built a course, opened in 84 or 5, I think. And so all of a sudden we had a huge increase in the number of golf courses, and guess what? Well, probably built too many. You know, San Jose built 2 additional golf courses. What's the one, the short one down there? Los Lagos, and then another one they redid, right? They're not making money. They issued bonds, and they're not making enough money. There's probably too many golf courses in this area, okay? Now, what should happen? Well, some of them are going to have to shut down or do something. So we had that issue come up with us. We had a golf course that used to make $500,000 a year. Okay, we're not supposed to make a profit. So what did we do? Well, we gave half of that $500,000 to the rec department to pay for all the other services we subsidized. So as a golfer, I was helping subsidize all these things. But I was okay as long as I was allowed to golf. And then the city attorney charged, well, you guys, you know, we have to write checks and you get legal advice from us, so we're going to charge you the other $250,000 for that. And I said, geez, are we going to charge the other departments that fee too so they don't make money? No. So that's how they kind of hid the profits. But again, at some point, there was too many golf courses, demand dropped, and the golf course started losing money. Okay? And it was publicly owned. And we were competing against private courses. One, private courses didn't pay as high a wages. We were paying people to mow lawns. We had 2 people that mowed the lawns. We paid them $150,000 a year. Okay? And that included benefits. Okay? I know that the private courses weren't paying that kind of money. Okay? So, you know, we were trying to figure out a way to outsource it. And as I said, we tried to do it. I don't think we did it successfully. But, you know, the problem is that there's competition. You know, and our council is like, well, we'll just raise the price and make more money. Really? You know, I don't have to play golf in Mountain View. I can go to Sunnyvale. I can go to Palo Alto. There's a lot of alternatives. But again, they didn't understand the market structure they were in. Building permits is a good one. So this is the one thing where planners know their monopoly power, which is I can charge whatever I damn well feel like for a permit. And cities do that. You know, we have developers that come in and they have to pay for studies and permits and things like that. And a lot of times the prices are determined by, well, it depends on how much time I put into this. And if it takes 50 hours, I'll charge you 50 hours. If it takes 10 hours, I'll charge 10 hours. Okay? You know, wouldn't it be nice if I gave you your grades based on how much you study? And you said, I studied a lot, Professor Means. I should get a higher grade. No. Okay. So, you know, this is one area where planners, you know, when we sit there and say, well, how much is it going to charge? A developer, how much is it going to charge? Well, it's whatever we say it does. Okay, now, in a more competitive market, what would you do? You would look for an alternative, right? And you would hope that what? There's someone that wants your services and money and would bid on it at a lower price. And that's why competition, you know, has this benefit to society because people are competing for your services, okay? Permits don't work that way. Now, here's my one idea to make permits, and it'll never pass because there's too many vested interests in here, okay? You know, let's suppose you want a permit to put a water heater in. Technically, you're supposed to do that when you go down to Lowe's and Home Depot and stuff, okay? Any city could approve a water heater online. I could send them a picture of an installed and show you it's installed correctly. So why don't we make permits like that and for electrical and plumbing and water and say any city can approve them and see what city wants to compete for that. You would see prices come down immensely, or some cities would not compete. They just say, screw it. Okay? And cities could still control the look and feel of a building, but for wiring and electrical and plumbing and these things, Why do I have to go to that city to get an approval? Why can't I just go to any city and say, hey, if this is built to code, and this is your code. Now, again, cities have different codes, but not a lot on some of these things. And again, they'd use that as an excuse. Well, we can't have someone doing that. Well, because they get to charge the price. You know, the Sierra Club did a study on putting solar on your roof, and they found prices from $160 for a permit to several $1,000s. Now, I don't think there's that much cost variation in the cities around here to justify those price differences. But again, they have the monopoly. They have the right to prove or not prove, okay? And they can charge pretty much what they want. Okay, so here is a more controversial issue, but again, about externalities, okay? So economists can figure out how to solve externalities. What are externalities? Externalities are the third-party impacts of exchanges between two parties, and it can be positive or negative, okay? And so a lot of times we think of negative externalities like pollution and litter and trash and things like that, okay? But, you know, is this a... Let me go back here. So one of the things we learn in economics is the Coase theorem, which is not really a theorem, but it's a guideline for looking at if you have zero transaction costs and you ignore the wealth effects of defining property rights, it doesn't matter how you define property rights. You'll still get the same efficient solution, okay? So one example that we try this in is smoking. Let's suppose you own a restaurant and you want to decide whether or not to allow smoking in your restaurant or not, okay? Now, the externality exists inside this building where you own it, but it doesn't exist outside the building because the smoke is going to be contained inside that building, okay? So now you have a decision to make. If I ban smoking, I'll ban smokers, I'll lose some money, but then I'll get some other customers that will provide me some money. So I have to think about that, right? So if I ban smoking and my profits go up, then I'll say, hey, I'm going to keep the ban in effect, okay? If I ban smoking and my profits go down, then I say, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, okay? So there's a problem that could be internalized completely by the owners of the property in a contained area, okay? So what have we done in the United States? Well, we've banned smoking completely in some areas, okay? And, you know, we tried kind of smoking areas and half and whatever. But the point is we let firms figure out what they wanted to do. But again, the anti-smoking group, that wasn't good enough. You know, so now they said we're going to ban it inside restaurants and stuff. And they got away with that. Now, in Mountain View, we had an exemption, which was apparently smoking was banned inside buildings, but not on outdoor dining areas that were enclosed. So a private bar might have a little back door area. So the Santa Clara County and their health guy offered us a grant to study a law. And I said, well, if we study it, we're going to pass it, so I'm not going to vote for this. So then the department came back with a rule to ban in private areas, and the owners, I don't know if they took it serious the first time at the study session because they objected, but they weren't heard, and again, it went forward. So of course, the night we make this decision, there's two decisions. One is to ban smoking and increase the distance outside the door where you can smoke from like 15 to 25 feet, and then to ban in private dining areas, which was exempt because of a loophole in the law. So we get this guy from the county who's a medical doctor, and he comes up and says, this is a great idea. You know, you should ban 25 feet, and he goes, and you know what? The owners of the firms are going to thank you later for this because they're going to make more money. And I would have let the first statement go, but I wasn't going to let the second statement go. So I called him back up, and I said, you know, you made a statement that 25 feet. I said, well, you're a doctor. What kind of studies have you seen on what a safe distance is for smoking distances? And his response is, there is no safe distance. And I said, so right now, as I'm standing here, I should be worried about smoke from a casino in Vegas or Reno, right? And he goes, well, yeah, that's being ridiculous. I said, well, but you said there's no safe distance. Well, there isn't, but 25 feet is good. Well, why is that good? Maybe 30. I'm trying to get some ideas here. I let him at least offer his professional experience, which turned out he had none. But then, I'm not going to let the economic statement go. And I said, and you also said that firms, if they banned smoking, would make more money, and the firms would thank you for passing this law. Isn't that option already available to them? Well, I guess so. Well, then why do we need a law? If they can figure that out, why do we need a law? Well, we just do. So, at my closing argument, which, I was going to lose this 5-2 no matter what, I pointed out, and we had the owners there of the 3 bars that had these outdoor areas. And I basically pointed to them and I said, Mrs. Graham, she runs the sports page in Mountain View. You know what, Mrs. Graham? And I looked at her and I said, you just don't know what you're doing. Even though you've run a business successful for 20 years, this guy sitting over here that's a health doctor who's never run a business, he knows better how to run your business than you. And, I got smiles from 3 people. Some of the council members came up and said, boy, you were really hard on her, weren't you? I said, yeah, really hard. Yeah. She was laughing. She got it. They didn't. And I asked a couple of reporters, I said, what did you think of that exchange? He goes, oh, you ripped that guy pretty good. So I said, so you got it. I said, but, and again, so what happened here now? What is an unintended consequence? Well, 1, they lost business, but 2, some of them said, well, Mountain View, the weather's pretty nice, so I'll go smoke out in the parking lot. And so right behind the restaurant, there's all these people smoking sometimes, and they're throwing their butts all over everything. It turns out you can only find the retail owner. So guess what? If I'm smoking in front of the restaurant on Castro Street, which was, they could have gone inside and smoked. No, now if they walk, if they're moving, they're not a customer of that restaurant. So now we're exposing more people to smoke. Now, the sports page actually pulled a brilliant substitute. Turns out they have a big outdoor area, and part of it's dining, but part of it is a volleyball sand court. And they decided that's not a dining area, so people can smoke there. And they got the police to prove it. In fact, during the meeting, someone asked the police, what are you going to do if someone's standing in front of a restaurant and we call the police? And they said, we're going to ignore the call. We're not going to come down to tell someone to put out a cigarette when he can move, and then he's not in violation of the law. So we made the problem worse, and again, a lot of council members were very proud of that fact. They seemed very enthralled about that. Well, I'm going to do questions later. So part of the problem that people don't understand is that when you deal with an externality, banning something or zero pollution is not the optimal amount, because there are costs and benefits to reducing the amount of pollution. And so that's one thing we learn in economics. Now, you got probably seen where we tax the supplier of the good, and then the tax internalizes the price, and you set it equals social price, social cost. Yeah, so that happens. Okay, here's another thing that is interesting: heritage tree ordinances. So we protect trees. If we didn't have a heritage tree ordinance, every tree in Mountain View would get cut down. So I'm told. And again, it totally ignores the benefits and costs of having a tree on your property. Now, trees have a positive externality, which is they provide carbon, and also they provide shade for your neighbors sometimes. A big tree on your street, So what happens? Well, we protect certain trees, not every tree, once it gets a certain size. And as trees get old, they become maintenance problems, and then you have to, maintain them and things like that. And sometimes the residents grow up with the trees, and they get old, and they say, hey, you know what? Tree, you've done good, but I can't maintain anymore. I want to cut it down and put another tree in or whatever. And we have this heritage tree ordinance where the tree is entirely protected from cutting down. Okay? Now, usually what happens is the neighbors come in, if he gets the appeal, if he applies and he gets the permission, the neighbors will come in and appeal and say, we don't want that tree cut down because it provides shade for me. Yeah, but you're a free rider. You're getting all the benefits of the tree and bearing none of the cost. Tell you what, why don't you help him maintain it? I would offer, I said, why don't you guys as a neighborhood help maintain that tree, and then he'll keep it up? Well, why should I? Well, because you're benefiting from it, Now, again, if this was a homeowners association where the trees are all owned collectively, there's a group that maximizes the amount of trees that should be on their property. They could tell you whether a tree is worth keeping or not. Okay? But for a public tree on private property, it doesn't work that well. We banned plastic bags, so was San Jose and stuff. And again, was it a pollution problem, a litter problem, or a nuisance problem, or I just don't like plastic bags? I don't think anyone should be allowed to put stuff in a plastic bag. Okay? That was the attitude. And again, there were studies done showing that plastic bags have less impact than reusable bags if you base it on reasonable reuse and things like that. Everyone just discarded that. And again, it was basically a vote on personal preference. And again, most of the people on council are old, they're single. They don't, when they go to the store, they buy $20 worth of food. They don't have a family, they don't drive and things like that. They have no connection with what I'd call the average citizen in Mountain View. Okay, so what are other things that politicians don't know? They don't know basic finance, cost-benefit analysis, and present value, okay? I put an asterisk there because in economics, you could probably major in economics and not learn any finance, but if you wanted to, you could, all right? So where did we have problems with people not understanding finance? Okay? I'll do the I've talked about we had this loan from the daycare center, and it was set up just as payment. So it said, here's what's going to cost, and here's how you pay it back. Okay? There's no interest rate. So I said, well, what's the interest rate for this loan? What's the internal rate of return? So I could see how much it would cost to borrow the money. The finance guy called me to his office the next day and said, here's the calculation, blah, blah. And I said, well, why didn't you show that? And he goes, because no one asked. I said, does anyone ever ask you stuff like this? I can do it, but no one ever asked. No one cares. We issued municipal bonds. So Shoreline is a redevelopment area, and we issued some revenue bonds based on revenue. So we issued municipal bonds, okay? We issued them in probably 2008 or 9, so during the recession, okay? So a muni bond, it's a 30-year bond, okay? Tax-free at the state and federal level. If you live in California resident, then you can buy this bond. It's tax-free, okay? Bonds are priced at what we call par value, 100, so that the interest rate, the coupon rate is set to that. So what do you think would be an appropriate interest rate for a bond like that? 30 years, 2008 or 9? Okay, 4 or 5? So tax-free, so taxable, that would equate to what? 8 or 9%, right? Okay? Mortgage rates were way lower than that, okay? Fixed rates, okay? So you know what ours was? 5 3/4%. Now, I objected and said, I'm not in the muni bond market. That seems a little high for me. Oh, Tom, we've got the experts here. Well, the experts were the people that were issuing the bonds, and they were saying, hey, 5 3/4 is great. And I said, well, we're doing business. The guys who are doing business, they don't have any incentive to offer us a great deal. We should rethink this. Okay? So if a bond is offering too high of rate, what should happen if I'm right? Right. So I checked last year. What do you think those bonds were going over par at? Close, 115 to 119. I think I was right. Because how much have interest rates changed in a couple of years? Very little. Okay. Evaluating a hotel project. We hired someone to evaluate a hotel project, give us revenue streams of different types of hotels, blah, 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 blah. He did all this present value analysis, which was good, and showed us what hotels type and what the costs were and what would have the highest rate of return. So what did a couple council members do? Well, they noticed a mistake in the calculation. They said if you add up all the nominal dollars for 30 years, it adds up to more than the present value calculation. Really? Yeah, so never heard of discounting dollars, okay? Now, that was in a private session, so I probably shouldn't say that, right? Okay, here was a great one. Google. So Google wants to build, we have this property. Instead of the hotel, Google bought it for a property, and then they were going to build on the other half of the property that we're going to put the hotel on. So rather than saying, you know what, we're not going to do the same deal. We're flush with money. We're going to give you $30 million bucks, straight up front. And here's the deal. If we never build it, you get some interest cost each year, but if we never build it after 10 years, we get a certain amount of money back based on you're holding the money and all that kind of stuff, right? But we had $30 million up front. So what do we do with that? Well, my idea was to give it to the Tom Means Memorial Fund. But other people had other ideas. So we hired someone to look at the different ideas, but here was the thing. Council members were wanting to say, well, so now, since they knew I knew economics and finance, like, well, let's choose the project with the highest present value, or what's the present value of $30 million today? It's $30 million. We have it today. What you really want to ask is, where would we get the highest return on an investment? What type of way of investing it would give us the highest return? But again, this was, people saying, well, we want the project, we want to know what the present value of $30 million is today. I told them that, but they didn't listen. And again, not everything can be evaluated. So we build bicycle bridges in town to connect freeways and over freeways and stuff. And, this is a classic example where you don't necessarily know the benefits. In other words, I know the cost of the bridge, and then, some of the council members are asking, yeah, but how do we figure out, whether it's worth it or not? Couldn't we couldn't we do a study and figure it out? And I said, well, here's what would happen in the private sector. You'd charge a toll, just like a bridge toll. And if it paid for itself, someone might build it and get it to pay for itself. But I said, if we're not going to charge a toll to use the bridge, we're never going to figure out the value of that bridge. And again, example of not understanding what the components are of benefits and costs. Okay, let's see. So when am I supposed to quit? 6:30? Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop at 6:25 or 6:30. Okay, let me talk about local government use and stuff, and this is where we get all kinds of stuff. Are there limits to growth? Can we plan growth? People will tell you, yes, we're going to do smart growth as opposed to stupid growth. We're going to do sustainable growth as to non-sustainable growth. I mean, they got all these buzzwords. And I ask people, where do you get this stuff? Because it's not in academic journals. It's not taught. And they say, well, I got it from a website. And there are some institutions and groups that claim to espouse this stuff, but it's very difficult. Parking and traffic issues. We study every parking and traffic issue ad nauseum. We do reports and stuff. And density and types of housing. What are the appropriate densities and things like that? We look at all that and study it very carefully before we make decisions. But again, we've got some no-growthers, and they'll complain and say, well, this is going to make my life miserable. And you sit there, well, exactly how is it going to be miserable? You don't live near the property. Or if you do, how is that going to help you? Are you in the traffic scheme every morning? Are you're going to lose your free parking in front of your house and stuff? Is that what you're worried about? So one of the things we do is we tax land and new development. And so here's where some people use some economics and have no clue what they're talking about. So one of the things we do with new development is we tax new development by saying, if you want to build 100 units, you have to give us 10 units, ours is 10%, or 15 units for low income. So you either have to build them and sell them as low income, or you rent them as low income. Okay? And the argument by the pro people for this type of housing is that it doesn't impact the price of housing because housing prices are competitive. And so the developer can't raise the price of housing because he's got to compete with everyone else. So basically what they're appealing to is a standard land tax, which is in every economics textbook, except they've misapplied it. And how is that? Well, because the examples in the economics textbooks assume that all parcels of land in that jurisdiction are taxed. Okay? So no one can avoid the tax. Okay? But in this type of tax, we're only taxing new development. So guess what? The landowner can say, hey, I might be willing to go for the project, I might not, depends on how much money I get, right? Because the developer once he realizes, incorporates the tax into his land residual value, he's going to say, well, I can't pay as much for the land now because I got to offer these huge subsidies. So landowner, here's my new bid. Well, the landowner can do what? Can accept the bid or reject it and say, fine, I'll move on. Now, what's going to happen if he rejects the bid? Well, the amount of new housing that can be developed is going to decline. So I point this out, and here's kind of my little thing of showing this, where you have a policy city, non-policy city. So I say, okay, let's assume land is perfectly inelastic for new development and prices are equal. I'll give you that assumption. I don't think it's necessary, but I'll give you that. So if some developers remove their land from potential new development, it's going to raise the price, okay? Now, it's also going to make prices higher in one city and lower in the other city. So if prices are going to equalize, tell me what's got to happen. Well, suppose you're in the policy city. What are you going to do? Yes, some of them are going to leave and go to the non-policy city and increase the demand, okay? So demand will drop in the policy city. It'll go up in the non-policy city. So now what's the net impact of the tax? It still raises prices in both cities, right? Okay? So even though I'm a city, I say, it's a bad policy. I don't want it in my town. If I'm nearby, I'm going to have to pay for that. And again, output's going to fall. Now, I could get a similar diagram if I did upward sloping supply schedules, and I'd get increase in output in one city and decrease. But again, this also raises an issue for my econometric students in the graduate thing, which is what? If you run a regression, you've got to have some spatial connection, right? Because now a nearby city, if it's close enough, is impacted by the policy even though it didn't pass the policy. Okay, so I've talked about economic and financial literacy. So I'm going to talk about collegial governance, okay, and so forth. Okay, so what is collegial governance? Well, that's the one thing in academics we do. And what does it mean? It means that I sit on committees on campus, everyone gets one vote, and everyone has an equal sitting at the table, okay? And so you have to learn how to politic. When you can't just say, hey, I'm better than you, I get more votes. No, everyone gets an equal vote. I learned from some of the best people in the economics department how to politic. Most of them are retired right now. Rudy Gonzalez, some of you know, was great at politicking. Jim Willis was chair for 20 years. He figured out how to stay chair a long time. He politicked. He knew how to collect and get a consensus or agreements. I learned a lot on campus. So when I go to the council meetings and politic and collegial, I had more experience. I had 20-some years of collegial experience when I ran. Most of them did what I did. They started on a commission, which I suggest, you should always sit on a commission because that's, for those of you who've never been engaged in collegial governance, you're going to have to learn how to do that. You can't do it in the private sector because the private sector decisions are made hierarchical, right? In other words, I get, this is like a typical interview. Well, why should you sit on a commission? Well, I'm a manager and I listen to my employees. Well, do you let them outvote you? Do you let them say, hey, you know what? That's a bad choice. We're going to do something else. No, you have to, so it's a different type of structure where everyone's equal and votes equally. The other thing is in academics, there's a lot more respect for truth and data. Council members get upset if the data doesn't support their viewpoints, and they will ignore it or say it's wrong. We do a parking study or traffic study and don't find an impact, and the no-growthers on our council say, well, it's wrong. Really? Why don't you tell me what's wrong with it? I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but, it's at least done professionally, and you should give it some respect. The other thing is, in academics, not all arguments are equal. Some arguments are better than others. And again, in city council, sometimes everyone thinks, well, it's a kumbaya time. Everyone is allowed to make an argument and should get the same respect. No, this is a public forum. We're trying to do something good for the city. We want the best arguments there. We want someone to make a good argument, and that's important. And the last thing is, a lot of people are unprincipled. They just vote with their preferences. And I'll give you a good example of that at study session, we were looking at design and zoning laws. And one of our no-growthers was just objecting to everything. Even though he had voted for it on the Planning Commission, he now was not supporting this stuff. And I kept asking him, well, what don't you like about this? Would you like it done this way? Should we set the setbacks here, the height? I mean, what would work for you? And he kept hodging and getting into a corner. And finally, he said, Tom, it's just, because I said, well, is it just a preference? You like this? And finally, he admitted, he goes, yeah, Tom, it's just subjective. I just make up my mind that night. And, I said, the problem with that, and I did this in public at a study session, I said, the problem with that is there's all kinds of people on the other side of the dais that are spending millions of dollars to develop in this town, and they're concerned that they don't know what side of the bed you're going to get up on tomorrow. Is it going to be on the right side or the left side? If that's how subjective it is. Or is it going to depend on what color tie you wear? And he missed the whole point of that. Everyone in the audience got it. That if that's how you're going to make decisions, it's pretty sad. But he thought that was okay. It's just purely subjective, and I'm in council. I have the right to make my decisions, and I make my decisions. That's, not a good way to make a decision. Okay, so let me finish up with, the question I got this time at lunch, how the hell did you win, Tom? If you were free market and all this kind of stuff, and you had all this economics. And this is a question I love from people. Well, Tom, you're thinking about it like an economist. Okay, fair enough. How are you thinking about it? What are you doing? What kind of principles are you using to analyze whether this is a good decision? And let me remind you, this is a decision on how to allocate scarce resources. That's right in the domain of economics, right? It's part of the definition of economics. So it seems to me economics should have some discussion in this. So I I'll give you two things. Matt Pear is an example of winning every precinct in his election, but, he's better looking than me. He went to better schools. So I had that disadvantage, okay? But I'll tell you, me and John Inks is a registered libertarian. Last election, he outpolled every Democrat in a town of Mountain View where there's 70% Democrats. A libertarian got the most votes, okay? And I'll tell you how he did it. He's a likable guy. He's patient. He listens. He votes on principle. He tells you what his thinking is and explains it to you. And he walked every house in Mountain View. Had a precinct list and hit every house. And where's Don Ball? Was he here? There he is. Don Ball also helped him. Walked every house, right? He walked every house. He outhoused me. But I didn't need that much help to win re-election. And again, dropping a flyer or meeting everyone, it provides a connection, okay? So that's how I tell some people that are kind of more conservative and maybe more free market and want to see a smaller government. It's not going to be but you've got to go out and let people see who you are, and you've got to look like you know what you're talking about. The most important thing to getting an election is writing a campaign statement, because most of you voters are not going to meet the candidate. You've got an election for mayor here, right? And, they're going to hold all these forums, but, not that many people will show up at them. Most of you are going to read a campaign statement, or you've read about something in the paper and you know guys, whether you like them or not and stuff like that. So if you don't know who's running, probably most of you will look at the campaign statement. So writing a good campaign statement, you need to set signals out there. So signals like, I'm qualified, I've got an academic training, I've got business training, I'm old, I have an age, I've been in the community for 20 years, okay? Those are sent signals. Now again, you can say, well, none of those are required, Tom. They're not. But they send signals so that it forces the other people to signal. Because if you're leading a ballot statement and a guy tells you, hey, I've got an MBA, and the other person never says anything about their academic credentials, what are you going to assume? Yeah, you're not going to assume the best, right? Okay? I did that with consultants, that claim they all have economics degrees, and then they don't list them, but then one person didn't list any degrees. So, what was my assumption there? It wasn't economics. It was probably, I won't say, but one of the non-traditional, well, more of the traditional. But the point is, it sends signals, okay? The other thing is endorsements, okay? Most endorsements are made by political groups that have agendas to push, okay? I ignored all the endorsements my first time. I just said, the only endorsements I interviewed for were the papers, and I didn't get them. But I was able to turn a couple papers around me, because here I am as a PhD in economics going against a community organizer, I'm totally unskilled person, and I'm sitting there and they're saying, well, we got to say something nice about Tom because it looks kind of weird. He's got a PhD in economics, he's done research, he's sitting on the Parks and Rec Commission. So they would say, well, Tom Means is a good candidate, he's got a PhD in economics, he's a college professor, he'd be a fine candidate, but we're going to go with someone else. So what I did in my ads in the paper is I then spun that. I said, hey, here's what the Mercury says about me. Okay? What do you think? Is that what you want in counsel? Do you want someone that understands economics and things like that and so forth? So that worked. I also spent the least amount of money. I didn't get any endorsements. I didn't spend any money. I refused to sign the campaign spending limit, which was $20,000. And everyone made a big deal of that until they found out I was only going to spend about $5,000. So I spent $5,000 and got 11,000 votes. That's probably the cheapest number of votes anyone ever got. Okay? Now, I wasn't like Inks. I did walk a lot, but I was well known in the community. I'd lived there for 30 years. I exploited my kids and my wife. My one kid was one of the best baseball players in Mountain View. Everyone knew him. When your kid plays in a sport and you coach in a sport, there's 400 and 500 families that see you. So if you do a good job of coaching or at least look human, you're going to get their votes. My other son was a musician, and he was involved in music in the schools where there's 500, 600. In Graham, there's like 900 kids, half of them involved in music. So that's one of the two schools where at least most of the parents know my kid. When they say, hey, I wonder if that's Dan Means' dad, we'll vote for him, And so, and my wife was well known as a community as an educator. She would do stuff. And so I was well known in the community, and people were kind of surprised I won. But the point is, if I had listened to the political intelligence, the people that hang around City Hall and tell you how to win an election, I'd have never won. None of them picked me to win. In fact, they were shocked that I won. And again, any paper or anyone that endorses an incumbent, that's no risk. What I want to see is pick non-incumbents and see if you have a track record at picking them. Okay. I think that's it. So, thank you.
Now's the time. Who would like to ask Tom a question? I'm sure we must have something. I know he had one. Go ahead.
Professor Means, I've been working for the government for the past 10 years. I'm still working for the government. I am in one of your class. So my question to you is, you seem to indicate that most of the folks who work for the government, they lack of the understanding of basic economic. Why is that the case?
Okay, so notice I didn't talk about people that work for the city government. I talked about the council members and politicians, okay? Technically, they're hired by the city, but those are the ones that don't know. In terms of staff, I had a great relationship for staff, and staff liked me. One, I asked interesting questions. Two, I respected their jobs. I respected them in their positions. In other words, if you're going to do this, here's I'm going to respect the fact that you're a professional and you know more about your subject than I do. I think the problem I had with some of the planners was planners have this notion, and I wouldn't call them socialist or state socialist, but they think they can plan the perfect city. And my question was always, how do you know that'll work? What about the economics of it? Well, how do you know you're going to build something and then no one shows up? And again, there are a lot of mistakes from that. So that's why I don't like planning too much, but I appreciate the staff. Now, some of the staff do learn economics. They get masters in public administration, and at some schools, not this one, they actually take some economics, and so some of them actually came to me with research papers they did on economics and taxation. I made comments on them and stuff like that. So I had a good relationship. The staff wasn't my problem. It was the council members.
Did you have something you wanted to ask earlier?
Sure. So, Professor Means, you alluded to the doctor who said these restaurant owners are going to thank you for prohibiting this service that they currently provide. So could it not be that there's a defector problem, that if anybody wanted to start doing something that would benefit all of them, some of them, one, could defect and get, a greater share of the profits, but if they were prohibited from doing it, maybe it would lift all of them? Is that never a scenario?
I don't know. What do you mean a defector?
Well, so like in a city where smoking goes on in every restaurant,
okay,
maybe people stay away because it's too smoky.
Okay, that's fine. That's
so then, but if somebody wanted to, but maybe it'd be hard to make a name as the non-smoking restaurant or something. And if you, I'm wondering, is there never a situation where banning it might make it so that the whole good across the board is better?
Right. Maybe the argument is, well, I'm not going to be too favorable to this argument, but maybe the argument is, if I do it and it fails and no one else follows me, then I'm going to look stupid. But the point is, you have the option of going back, And again, reputations, private firms can search for reputations. So if you're like, I don't know, what's a healthy vegan type restaurant, you probably have people that aren't going to be smoking and drinking large amounts of alcohol, right? So you can specialize in that restaurant, and if there's enough demand, you can succeed, Whereas, let's say you're a steakhouse and you serve hard liquor, and well, smoking's just one more of those bad things people do that eat, tons of beef or meat. They're probably going to allow smoking, and you might say, well, it's not fair because I don't want to smoke, but I want to go to a steak restaurant. But you need a market for that. You need enough people, And I would tell you, this is based on Rudy Gonzalez's, my former colleague who was a big smoker. He says smokers will outbid non-smokers any time of the week in restaurants because smokers like to finish a dinner with a cup of coffee and a cigarette, and they're going to pay for that. In other words, that's time is money. They're going to tip more and pay more for the right to sit there and smoke in the restaurant because they know they're using a resource there, right? And so smokers would probably outbid non-smokers in a lot of restaurants.
I guess my question would be, why do you feel like economists aren't trying to be more politicians so we can have more, educated economies?
So why aren't there more
economists trying to be politicians?
Okay, there's opportunity cost of time. But I think there are some economists. There were some that have been in the Senate and stuff. There are some, for example, our state senator, Barbara Boxer, majored in economics. Yeah, but, just majoring in economics, I think you need more than that. You need the training, a graduate degree or something. Now, people get upset when I say, who would you hire to run a $200 million company? And I said, if you elect people that don't have experience or the financial economic experience, you get what you pay for. And they're saying, well, you're being elitist, but I'm saying, would you put that person in charge of a $200 million private company? And not everyone is qualified to be a politician other than the fact they can run. I think economists would like to see, on average, smaller government. And again, this is why some people don't run. If you get involved, part of government is, there's this incentive to expand and do all that stuff. And I think it turns off a lot of people that way. I did it. I wouldn't do it again. I don't like the partisanship. The cities, it's a nonpartisan race. So whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent or libertarian doesn't matter. If I ran for another race, that's how I'd run too. I think the partisanship now is just, and again, it all comes down to who do you elect? And do you want to elect someone that you think has governing experience and stuff like that? Look at, I'll say this. We elected a president without any governing experience. He was 2 years as a state senator. A lot of times we elect presidents that have at least governed. And what's the advantage of that? They've had to govern both sides of the aisle. They've had to deal with Republicans and Democrats, balance budgets and things like that. And I think that's why senators tend not to do well as presidents, because they've never really had the governing experience.
Yes. Hi, Professor Means. You talked about the first foray into your public life was as a commissioner on the Parks and Rec Commission, right? How did you talk to the city council to get first started? Did you have some?
Okay.
And how did that city council react to your economics background?
Okay. So, and again, this is from years of some maturity. So when I interviewed for Parks and Rec, there were 4 of us, and they have a set of questions. And the first question is, why do you want to be on the Parks and Rec Commission? The first 3 answers were basically, I don't like what the city is doing. If I get on this commission, I'm going to change this policy or I'm going to pursue this personal political agenda. Okay? So when it got to me, I said, I'm just a resident here and I want to help serve the community. So now they're looking at 3 people that if we put them on, they're going to push a political agenda. Here's Tom. He just wants to help. Okay? Now, I did get into one confrontation there because they asked about providing public goods, and I said, well, it depends on the demand for them and whether or not we should provide them, and that kind of signaled me as I would use economics. But on that council, 2 of the 3 were pretty pro-business and 1 wasn't, so it worked out. I got recommended and then was put on the commission. Now, I would say, for all of you that want to start in politics, I've told people, get on a commission. Because you need experience sitting with people of different viewpoints and stuff and how to communicate and politic and be collegial. I will make another political comment about that. I think people that just run for office because they can run for office without that experience, do a disservice. Because why are you going to do a better job if you haven't worked your way up, So, you have what? Is it congressional race? You've got Mike Honda, who's relatively old, and some people want to say he's too old to be in politics, and then there's a young guy coming in, but the young guy is a successful guy, but he's never worked his way up through governance. He just wants to jump in as the congressional level. And, I think there's a little arrogance there of saying, well, why do you think you can do the job when you haven't demonstrated any skill except in the private sector? The government sector is different.
I have one for you.
Yeah.
So do you think that there should be some minimum standards for politicians?
I think the voters should take that into account. I'm not for saying, I'm just saying when you vote for people, you should look at their qualifications. Why should they be allowed to run a huge budget? I mean, we have a $200 million budget. It's hard enough to go through it. Now, the advantage of local governments is they usually have a city manager that's trained in public service, economics, and things like that has some idea of how to run a company, okay? At the state and federal level, you don't have that. You just have the politicians running everything. So I would say, there's been some studies on cities that have strong city managers, okay? So San Jose has a semi-strong city manager, I think, right? But the mayor still sets a lot. Oakland has the mayor, and then some towns, it's amazing the variance of government. So in some towns, the city manager is the mayor, and he can be completely clueless on how to run a city, but he can get elected. And there's been studies showing that, the strong city manager forms of government do a better job than the weak city manager format. And again, there's a lot of different, it's in the city, there's a lot of different variations of, some city managers get elected. So I think in Santa Clara, is it the treasurer or the controller that gets elected? And, we elect, in San Jose, you elect a mayor, whereas we elect council members and then rotate the mayor through and stuff. So it's more of a ceremonial position.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up, I'm curious, did you think from viewing people through the time that you were on the council, did people come in kind of raw, and then did they learn through the process? And was that typical or not typical?
I think it's a tough job when you come in without the experience. I mean, it's a big startup. As I said before, I was very weak on land economics, and I didn't understand why markets were working the way they were there. I think council members, they tend to want to make decisions in groups and get everyone to go along. So they want to be part of the pack sometimes and not look as the lone vote against something and so forth. I would say, Matt Pear went to economic stuff, we read economics. John Inks. Yeah, right. That's a close substitute. And John Inks went to conferences. He presented at API on budgeting processes. And again, he reads a lot about economics and stuff. So I think whereas others, it's just they weren't trained that way. They maybe were an English major, and so learning economics was the last thing they want to do. They hate statistics. They hate economics.
And that is the end of our time. So if you have other questions for Tom, if you want to join us over at Flames, I encourage you to come over and have something with us. In the interest of time, we'll stop right now, though. So I do want to let you know that we'll have 3 more lectures in next semester for the fall, and I want to give Tom a hand. Thank you very much for coming.
That's right. I was just trying to formulate the question. Well, he can still ask the question.